So I am going to introduce Heather Scoffield, who is going to be moderating the next panel. Heather, as most of you know, is a economics columnist and bureau chief with the Toronto Star, and a really great journalist who had has a long history at a young age, which is a good combination. Yeah, that's good, true? Long history, young age, yeah. At Reuters and Canadian Press, a place called the Globe and Mail, etc. And we'll do a fine job on this, really important panel. PPF is quite dedicated to, first time we meet in person, huh? So for this pandemic, is quite dedicated to the proposition of greater Indigenous ownership of resources, of businesses across the country, and is very encouraged to see a lot of progress in this manner, and is doing a lot of work with with everybody on the panel, actually. So congratulations to all of you who move things forward so extraordinarily, and I think given a lot of encouragement to other Indigenous groups and First Nations across the country. So Heather, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ed. So I'm very much looking forward to this panel because I've been writing about economics and thinking about reconciliation in the same sentence for quite a while, but for me, reconciliation does necessarily imply a shared prosperity, and I think we need to probably think pretty hard about what that means in terms of economic independence and self-reliance, and that's on the one hand very daunting, but on the other hand full of potential and a lot of challenges there that I'm hoping the three of you can take us through. We have, you're going to give us some great examples about how you've made it work. We have Sharleen Gale in the middle. She's the chief of Fort Nelson and also the chair of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, involved in investments in oil and gas, and she's going to tell us a lot more about that when we get to her. We have, on the far left, we have Geordie Hungerford, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the First Nations Financial Management Board, involved in, also from the Gwich'in, from the northwest end of Yukon, and involved in helping invest in First Nations, and you're going to get through some examples for us there too. And then of course we have Chief Terry Paul from he's the chief of Membertou, and also drove the whole takeover of Clearwater, and would like us all to know that he was a hippie in the 1970s. My first question for you, actually, we're gonna start with you. How do we get to here from there to here? You're gonna tell us that story, but also I'm really hoping that you can tell us, talk to us a little bit about your experience with Clearwater, and not just you've been at this for a very long time, but I'm hoping that you can really pinpoint what it is that other First Nations with as much ambition as you have, what they can take from your experience.
Yeah, I didn't realize that my aside to you was going to become public, so
I'm a journalist.
I have to watch my words. Yeah, like the Clearwater deal is it's definitely a game changer for us, and I believe that it's a game changer for all Indigenous people across this country. And it's an example of what can be done when you work hard. I'd like to say, to start, where it starts with relationships with people, good relationships, respectful relationships. And this didn't happen overnight. It took quite a while, and developing that relationship with the original owners really meant a lot. Not realizing that back then, it was just the way I do business, with anyone, and that's with respect, and for sure a great interest in that area, the fishery. Like our people been in the, have benefited from the fishery since time immemorial, as they say. But, we can go back at least 13,000 years when we were dependent on the waters. And it was sort of like, I guess, like a godsend where the original owners were at an age where they were wanting to retire and move on. And they didn't really have a succession plan. And their children didn't want to be in that type of business. They tried, and they certainly, they told me themselves they would prefer to be in other fields, which they did. So it's really, like I said, it's a game changer, and it solidifies our need to be out there in the water where we should be, and for the longest time, we were prevented from being in the waters, Indian shore, and particularly the offshore. So when this opportunity came, we were very excited about it. Most all the deal was negotiated virtually. The partners that we had, who are a company called Premium Brands that's based in British Columbia, were the successful partners. We did talk to a number of potential partners that were interested in acquiring this, and we knew ourselves that we did need a partner. We couldn't do it ourselves. But the proviso that we indicated to other potential partners that we would eventually want to own 100% of the company. So most of those potential partners walked away, including the partner that we ended up with, because of our requirement that we eventually own 100% of this company. So they walked, but they came back and they made an offer that, why don't we go 50-50, and then they said that because we want to be in this long term, just like you. So when they came back with that, we talked to them a little bit more about it, and I asked them, well, what is your long term? What do you mean by you're in this for a long term? They said, well, 30 years. And then they asked us, well, what is your long term being in this? We said, until the rest of time. So they were really impressed with that.
Yes, the definition of patient capital.
Yeah, for sure. And so, and of course they would said eventually, if they don't intend to sell their share of it, but if and when they do, we would have the first right of refusal. So we accepted that, and it's a $1 billion company, and the Mi'kmaq invested $500 million of that, so to become 50% owners. So a very significant acquisition in many ways, particularly being an indigenous group. And in our past, we spent probably about 90% of our time in the water. So it was great for us, and that also that we were able to really springboard to the offshore fishery, which we've never been part of before.
So just to continue with that, with some of those themes over to Geordie, you're like, it seems with Clearwater that the equity stake, the majority stake too, was and the hard-nosed negotiating tactics were pretty key. Is that what you see? Can you take us a little bit through how you operate, and I guess take us through about what makes a successful First Nations economy and what your role is in that?
Yeah. So we look at it's not, in some ways it's not rocket science. So there's been lots of research done on how countries, for example, in East Asia, were able to develop themselves very rapidly in the 50s and the 60s. And so the Harvard Project down in the US did similar research for American Indian tribes. And what they found is that the main factors were having good institutions and laws, having a focus on self-determination and running the businesses, running the opportunities themselves within the nation, a focus on culture. So, for example, what Chief Paul was saying about investing till the end of time and incorporating cultural values, and then having strong leadership. And obviously, Chief Paul is a legend out on the East, and so having that strong leadership is another key driver in order to go and develop communities. So we see the right to self-government and capacity to govern as prerequisites for development. And if governance is weak, then there ends up being weak outcomes. And if governance is strong, there are strong outcomes. And so one of the things that we do with our process is to work with nations to ensure that they have a financial administration law, so that there are laws in place that are very clear as to how to manage the accounting and the finance of the organization, and to provide an ability for the nation to be resilient. So if there's a change in government, the nation will continue to have the same kind of strong leadership going forward. We work together under the First Nations Fiscal Management Act. And under that, we have 3 organizations. So there's ourselves as the First Nations Financial Management Board, and we focus on building these financial strength within the nation. So through passing financial administration laws, and then through a certification process that the nations go to through us for certifying that they have financial management systems in place. And Chief Paul's nation was the first one to go through that with us. They were also leaders in using ISO to prove that they had the strong financial management in place. But we also work with the First Nations Finance Authority, which you guys worked with in terms of the borrowing. And so they are able to organize financing for nations at rates that are commensurate with the government of Ontario. And then the First Nations Tax Commission we work with very closely as well, which allows nations to go and raise revenue themselves through tax.
Okay, thanks. Just to now to turn to Chief Gale, could you tell us a little bit about your First Nations Major Projects Coalition and what that means for where do you see economic reconciliation? What does that actually mean to you? You're there working on projects, oil and gas in your community. What does it mean to you when we talk about economic reconciliation for the people that you're working with?
Well, thank you. First off, I just want to say that I'm very excited to be here on this stage with Terry and Geordie. And thank you, Heather, for moderating today. So economic reconciliation is really important as we move into the future, especially when we're going into an energy transition. So important that we really include Indigenous communities. We, as a country, are going to have to access their territories to be able to get the natural resources. And in order to do that, you're going to need a social license going forward. The last thing that we want to do is sit in court. We're done winning case after case. We want to move forward, and in order to do that, we're going to need the help and assistance from people in this room, people in business, people that can make change with policy and regulation. I feel that once we start talking about this in a meaningful way, regulatory and policies, can change. There needs to be that shift. Projects costs will be reduced. Environmental stewardship will be increased by including the Indigenous nations. They know their land better than anybody else. They know where you can't build projects. And also, you'll also see a lot of Indigenous communities starting to be a part of this transition. You'll see more Indigenous businesses. You'll see more Indigenous workers leading this and supporting industry and governments as they build major projects within their territory. One of the projects that I'd like to talk about is the CGL equity position. So the First Nation Major Projects is a non-political organization. We're not project specific. The request does come from the nations. It could be an individual nation or nations that want to come together. Like, for example, the pipeline, it crosses over many territories. We were able to assist them to make an informed business decision on that. We don't have the capacity within our communities to be able to make business decisions like you do in this room. So we need that support. And through the coalition, we're able to provide those services for free, which is tremendous. So you look at other things that are happening around the country, which is really important to be able to be involved in these acquisitions. And I think another example that I'd like to share with you is Hydro One in Ontario, including Indigenous people in the equity participation for any greenfields going further. So that's tremendous. And those are the kind of conversations we need to start having in this country if we're going to be successful. And we have to do it together, and we have to change.
So let me just follow up on that a little bit, especially, I mean, you're dealing with Coastal GasLink, and you know, obviously we've all heard of the problems that have been there, the confrontations and the long struggle on both sides, many different sides. So how do you navigate? How do you find reconciliation in that? And you know, I guess I just wonder more generally. You know, you've all talked about finding equity, getting equity stakes, finding financing, and that this is a way towards prosperity, which leads to reconciliation. But if there are different cultural points of view within communities and with everybody in the business community as well, how do you overcome that?
So, I mean, that's a discussion that has to happen between leadership about coming together to support the project. I can't speak for any other communities, but I can give you a personal experience of my own from my own territory. So I'm Chief Sharleen Gale from the Fort Nelson First Nation. We have the 3 biggest gas basins in North America. And, you know, when the tenures were being sold in our territory, the government came in, sold them for $5 billion. Our capacity levels were really low. We had 2 people in our lands office. So it was pretty devastating to see new technology like fracking coming. We had no idea what we were in for. We had no idea what that meant. However, we have a lot of traditional people that continue to live on the land. They weren't pushed out by the Indian agent when, you know, the RCMP came to enforce people to move to the reserve. They continue to live on the land and sustain their life like our people have for thousands of years. So when fracking came in our territory, it was vast changes with the cumulative impacts. And our people were seeing our lakes and our streams, the surface water being drained, and vegetation issues, and projects being built that don't meet our values. So, like I said, the last thing I want to do is sit in court. I want to work with people like you so that we can move projects properly. Our people know where projects can and can't go. And so with that, we had to really build up our capacity within the lands office and start working with industry. However, not everyone understands when it comes to partnerships with First Nations. And so when these big oil and gas companies came in, they said, you'll never have equity. We're not doing impact benefit agreements. And so what they did is they formed a coalition called the Horn River Producers Group. And truthfully, in my leadership, I felt like I was being bullied and I had nowhere to go. So with that, you know, I have a few people that were supporting me in this room, like Harold Calla. He was at that meeting where we wanted to bring in government, industry, policymakers, and First Nations that would be affected from the pipeline from ship to shale. So pretty much the Haisla, all the way from the pipeline up to Fort Nelson First Nation, to have a very important discussion about how could we successfully move this project forward. Unfortunately, the mind thought wasn't there. They wanted to continue to leave us behind, and we had to ask them to leave the meeting so that we could have a real discussion. And that's what we're trying to get out of today. Could have had several pipelines built, and that would have been great if we could have provided some economic prosperity to those communities while they looked after the environmental stewardship piece. I look forward to the day where we can have that conversation with oil and gas, because it needs to happen now. You can't come to our community with your preconceived plans. You need to come to us at day one so we can build these projects with you successfully.
So Geordie, just to follow up on that a bit, I mean, those demands that, you know, that there be environmental stewardship, that there be you know, full involvement of whatever First Nation community is involved in the natural resource project at hand. At what point does it become the norm that a company coming into an area, I mean, how do you've been working with a lot of various communities to take them from here to there. You know, at what point does this become, or how do we make that normalized?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, you know, we've got 2 jurisdictions now, Canada and BC, that have signed on to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And so under that legislation, there's a requirement to cooperate and to consult. And so I think going forward, we're seeing that kind of cooperation starting in British Columbia. They're going to be implementing their Reconciliation Action Plan, which includes how to comply with UNDRIP, as it's called. I think that fundamentally, through breathing life into that, is the way that we'll see more of this cooperation between the communities and the developers.
Okay. I'm going to take a question from the audience here for Chief Paul, actually. What is the most important thing nations can do to build the capacity to achieve the scales of these projects? And I wonder, I mean, your name is so attached to the Clearwater deal, but you know, you talked about having, you know, that knowing the right people is so much part of that. So how have you brought your community along?
Well, they're certainly, my community was very aware of what we were doing, and like, you know, and we feel like, you know, we're a very progressive community, and people want to move from, certainly from where they're at. So we certainly have the license from the community to acquire companies like this. And this isn't the only deal that's out here. I want to tell people that there's a lot of potential opportunities for not only Indigenous people, but non-Indigenous people to partner on a lot of the projects that are coming on stream. We actively look for the proper fit for us, and we find the people that align with our vision, or, you know, to a lot of that extent. I know we can't do the same together on everything, but like, you know, where we can get to a point where we're able to work together, and that what our requirements are satisfied through an agreement with our partner. So we certainly have the community on side, because we inform them along the way. We make sure that we communicate with our people, and this is what gives our, like, what they call the social license. You know, I think that's very necessary if a project is going to succeed as much as it can.
So that's on the social side. And what about the building capacity on the, you know, the accounting? Who's going to do the next hard-nosed bargaining that you did, and that you've shepherded all the way through?
Well, we ourselves have succession plans. Like you know, like it's been mentioned, I've been chief going on 40. At the end of my term, it'll be 40 years. You know, and that's a long time, you know. You know, where I'm starting to become like become what I feel like a happy despot. Like, you know, it's time to move. It's time to move on and let the youth come in. And I'm very happy and feel very secure about the type of youth that are coming up. You know, a lot of them are lawyers, you know, and they're accountants, you know, they're teachers, and they're entrepreneurs themselves. So I feel comfortable about what's coming, and I feel assured that what we have accomplished and leaving for them will help make our community even much more prosperous, and that we're in this position to help other communities to achieve their goals in that area. So I know I've talked to a number of our people, particularly the lawyers, who may have interest in running for chief, you know, and I give them advice on how to accomplish that. I know that our people will pick the best person that we have in order to continue the growth that we are experiencing in Membertou.
So that's on the human resources side. Geordie, I want to talk a bit about financing because I do wonder, and Chief Paul's mentioned it too, is it there? Is it how you have to fight for it every time? And we're in this era where every corporation has, they're pushed by their shareholders to have ESG, to have that triple bottom line. Does that help in terms of accessing financing for an entrepreneurial First Nation?
I think it's just starting to have an impact. So certainly in the next little while, we're going to see more sustainability standards being adopted around the world and within Canada. And so we as the FMB have been involved meeting with the new International Sustainable Standards Board. And this kind of reporting will report on things like relationships with Indigenous people and following Indigenous rights and the Constitution of Canada. And so investors that, or at least businesses that are complying with UNDRIP will end up likely having a lower cost of capital. And they can pass that on to the nations in terms of the deal making that they'll be doing. We're also seeing a desire for Canada to be more involved with respect to reconciliation. And so I think we'll see more opportunities like what you guys had with respect to your financing, where the provincial government and the federal government will be assisting nations to be able to finance their deals.
Okay, so go ahead, Chief Gale.
I'd just like to add to that because I think it's important. Well, first off, Fort Nelson First Nation is part of the FMB process, and it's a very important process for us to show the world that we are financially responsible, and we do have a first financial administration law. And I appreciate the work that you do and what you guys give to our community, the tools and the capacity to be able to do that. So we've also been able to build up our finance team, which is really important to do this work. But what I wanted to say is that First Nations are leading this transition, this energy transition. We are the biggest owners across this country of energy projects, including along with municipalities and government. So I think that's a first thing that is really important to say. But the Fort Nelson First Nation is looking at doing a geothermal facility, and it's one of its first in Canada. And we would not be successful if we didn't get a $40 million grant from NRCan. And I think that's really important for people to hear because that's what this is really about, is bringing partnerships together. You see some provinces that are incorporating Indigenous loan guarantees. Some provinces are behind. We need to do more of that work. The Minister of NRCan made an announcement. What that announcement does is helps our communities to be able to be a part of these projects by getting access to capital at lower rates, like Georgie's saying. And that's what they do. They assist us in that, especially through the financial board too. So I think just going forward, we need to change the way we do business in Canada. And through the coalition, we have about $17 billion worth of project portfolios. And it's the communities that are coming to us and saying we want to get involved. We no longer want to be left behind. And what I have found when I told you about my story about corporations coming into our communities and telling us how they're going to operate is not going to happen anymore. And I think Indigenous people have made that very clear. We want to be involved meaningfully. And so when we say that, the corporations, when they come in, our people get left behind. They fly people in, they fly people out, they hit the airport, they don't even hit the community, and we get no tax dollars. There's a loss there. But when Indigenous people are involved meaningfully through equity, nobody gets left behind. And we all move forward together. Because at the end of the day, what we all talk about is about 7 generations and moving the 7 generations forward. And when we talk about 7 generations, we're not just talking about our children, we're talking about your children too, and their grandchildren. So we need to make change in this country, and it needs to happen now, or somebody else in some other country is going to build these projects, and all of us are going to be left behind.
So how does net zero figure into that thinking? this question is for whoever wants to take it, but net zero seems to me, at least on the surface, to be very compatible with thinking over 7 generations. But there are a lot of people who would argue that any kind of investment in oil and gas at this point is counterproductive to net zero. And as you said, we've got Indigenous communities that are on top of those resources right now. So how do you grapple with that? Does the Canadian commitment to get to net zero make things easier or harder for you?
Well, I understand, and it's related to the ECG, where, you, at one time, very recently, the important part of the success of a company was just the bottom line, financially. That's the goal, and that was the measurement of success. Where in today's world, where the world is in trouble, and the world needs help, and it's only people that can change that. So we need to look at what we do, is that we look at our processes and see how we can make changes in order to achieve net zero. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of people working on it at the same time to be able to really save our planet. So it's not about wanting to do it. We have to do it. So if we all did the same thing, all looked at our processes and what steps we can take to get to a greener earth, then we need to consciously make real changes in how we extract our resources from the bounty of this land. And I believe that we need to continue doing that. Not for us, not for our kids, children now, but the future generations. We need to leave things for them to be able to live.
Go ahead.
So I think it's important to let you know about the Geothermal Project, which is actually something that was created by attending a conference like this and having our leadership there hearing about the potential for a depleted oil and gas field, the Clark Lake, being transformed into a geothermal opportunity. And we were like, light bulbs went off. We need to explore this. This is 5 kilometers away from our territory. This is actually something that meets our values as an Indigenous person. And so it's really neat to see that our leaders throughout history have really stood up for our rights and title, have always protected our treaty and what that relationship meant with others. And so that provided for 6 generations, a generational opportunity. We have 80 elders in our community that are retired now, that were a part of this transition. And, there's a lot of guidance and wisdom from that. So to be involved in this geothermal project, we have reclaimed that site. And now we're going to have a generational opportunity for 7 generations. It's going to provide food security. There's an opportunity to look at the brine. Is there lithium for battery storage and all those things that need to come with this project? Could we do it a little bit cleaner than mining? We look at the spirit of the project. These projects have spirits. As an Indigenous person, we don't just take off the land. When you take something, you have to offer something back. And I don't think people understand those concepts. And that's why I think when we get involved in major projects, we need to do the flip. And the flip doesn't happen here. People cannot make decisions for us at the board level. That needs to stop. The decisions need to be made in our community, on the ground, day one, with us to be successful going forward. And that's it.
Geordie, I wanted to talk to you just to switch the focus a little bit away from net zero, but both chiefs talk about equity, taking equity stakes. Is that the only way towards economic reconciliation? I mean, you've worked with First Nations, taking them out of third-party management, moving them into a very more independent path. Is equity always part of that, or are there other ways?
Well, I mean, historically, there have been other ways that deals were struck. So there'd be employment agreements. There'd be an ability to maybe take some revenue off of the top. But I think ultimately, First Nations generally prefer to be owners of the opportunity and to be able to be in alignment with the entity or the developers that are trying to move the project forward. I think as well that when it comes to the opportunity for the community, you know, they want to be there for the whole duration of the opportunity. So, and that's what equity does.
And now I would wonder, back to you, to Chief Paul. I would just the same kind of question. I mean, you insisted on having that equity stake, but is that something that is that a very key part of your recipe for success here, or are there other ways that you know, an entrepreneurial or business-minded group could actually succeed?
Well, I want to say no, you know, that we don't really require to own the assets, but I mean, it's a really complicated question here, like, you know, because when you think about like where we come from, you know, I mean, like even at the time of colonization, like when you look at what was taken away from us, you know, our land, our homes even, our culture, even our children. So we have that backdrop, and we really don't want to stay there. No one should have to stay there. So as Geordie said, I agree with that, like where like I would prefer to own that asset, you know, and then this is part of the reason why we fought so hard to be in the position we are with Clearwater. And it certainly adds and gives more a sense, I'm certainly proud about it, but like more a sense of that ownership, like in that you're getting more control, not only with the corporation, but the people in the community of your own personal lives, because you're in a better place and you're able to make a lot more of your own decisions versus the government deciding for you.
Go for it.
Just one closing comment. I think it really has to do with the 3 Ps, and that's partnership, prosperity, and protect. And what that partnership looks like, you'll have to speak to the nations on the ground. They'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. I'm kind of overwhelmed at the success of all 3 of you. It's very inspiring. So thank you for your words.
Thank you.